Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahabati ajma'in. Allahumma inni nawaitu at-ta'allam wa ta'lim wa tadhakkura wa tadhkir wa nafa' wal intifa' wal ifadata wal istifada wal hatha ala tamassuki bi kitabillahi wa sunnati rasulihi sallallahu alayhi wa sallama wa du'a ila al-huda wa dalala ala al-khair ibtigha'a wajhi Allah ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم يا الله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. So we'll continue from page 24-25 of the book. And the Imam begins, أيها الولد ينبغي لك أن يكون قولك وفعلك موافقا للشرع إذ العلم والعمل بلا اقتداء للشرع ضلالة وينبغي لك ألا تغتر بالشطح وطامات الصوفية لأن سلوك هذا الطريق يكون بالمجاهدة وقطع شهوة النفس وقتل هواها بسيف الرياضة لا بالطامات والترهات. So as I mentioned, it's important that we read the Arabic to acquire the blessings of the text and the Imam's words. And so the Imam says, the translation is there on page 24 at the top, O disciple, it is desirable for you that your speech and action be in accordance with the law. I know it says desirable, but it's basically saying they must be. Since knowledge and action which are not modeled on the law, sacred law, the Sharia, are error. And you must not be deceived by the ecstatic expressions and outbursts of the Sufis. I'll come back to this. Since travel on this path should be by way of self-exertion, severing the ego's appetite and killing its passions with the sword of discipline, and not by way of outbursts and useless statements. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the nafs is such a thing that we cannot engage in a negotiating position with it. There's no negotiation with the nafs. The nafs must be the desires of the nafs must be severed. It's not that we engage in give and take in that sense. We must understand, and that's what the Imam says here. Now, the thing that we have to always keep in mind is that there is a reciprocal relationship between our daily lives and our worship. So for example, when we wake up, we go to work, we go to study, whatever it may be, we can term that daily life. And we can term worship, when we pray and when we fast. Now, I've mentioned in the past that that's not really a correct way of looking at it. We can't separate ibadah from the things that we do in day-to-day, because we have to see everything as being an ibadah. Right? But just for our purposes here, to describe something, a phenomenon, that if you take our daily lives, we have to understand them as being complements to one another. Our daily life and our ibadah must complement each other, such that the better that we are in our daily lives, the better we will be in our ibadah, and vice versa. And you'll recall that we've said this many times, that there is no concept, or it seems like a very odd concept to think that we can be completely absent and neglectful of good character in our day-to-day. So say you work in a company, or you're a businessman, or you're a teacher, whatever you may be, or you're a student. You could be someone who doesn't work. It doesn't matter. The point being is, in your day-to-day interactions, you don't really give much regard to people. We don't give good opinion to their actions. We don't think of the best of others. Everyone has done something and it's wrong against us, right? That attitude to life will make it difficult for us to translate a healthy relationship in our ibadah. Because when we stand in front of Allah in the prayer, in the salah, right, how are we expecting ourselves to almost switch off or switch on? That, there's some button that's called taqwa button, and we put it on and we Allahu Akbar, and we're in the prayer, and somehow we're going to be mindful, attentive, aware of the fact that we're standing in front of Allah. Right? Why? Because we're not doing it in our day-to-day lives. So the idea is that we can't separate those things. We have to recognize that we're here because Allah has put us here, and He's put us here for a reason. And that reason isn't that we separate our lives into these boxes, work life. We have this very famous saying in our culture, which is deen and dunya. Right? It's an incorrect way of separating something which cannot be separated, because there is only deen, and you happen to live inside the dunya. That's how you have to look at it. So the correct way of, approaching it is that how do you navigate the dunya from the perspective of the deen? Not that you have the deen and you have the dunya and there has to be a balance between the two. Right? No, you have to have balance in your deen. As a consequence, you'll find balance in your what we refer to day-to-day activities, right? And so what the Imam is saying here, a couple of things that we'll note in this paragraph, is that he says, firstly, look, don't be deceived by the ecstatic expressions and outbursts of the Sufis. Because sometimes you'll hear things from the people of Tasawwuf that are incongruent with the Sharia. They are not something which is permissible or recognized in the Sharia. So don't pay attention to those things. And neither should you pay attention to what the Imam refers to here as at-turrahat. Turrahat here it's actually a Persian word, and it means a small road that branches off a main road. And the idea is that it's essentially useless talk. In other words, we can listen to people and their spiritual states, and sometimes because people recognize that spirituality is a powerful tool, and because our nafs is masterful at recognizing that I can deploy this tool to gain currency over other people, we will then adopt piety and spirituality as a means of influence, as a means of authority over other people. We're not interested in what the things people say. We are interested in the things that people do. And the outward signs of piety are demonstrated first and foremost by someone's actions being in accordance with the Sharia. So does someone pray? And are they regular in their prayers? Meaning things that which you can discern from someone. When they speak, do they speak? Does their speech contain things about other people? Or do they mention things about other people and their opinion about other people? When life's events happen to come by them, do they complain about them, or do they accept them with patience? Right? So these are all things, you can't run away from it. Now, if you're around someone and you've been with them for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and you've noticed, subhanAllah, this person, I've seen that they pray, and they're not given to speaking about other people. When I see difficulties come their way, they're patient, they're generous, they're kind, they never expect anything in return despite whatever good that they may do to other people. That's a good sign, right? So what the Imam is telling us that, look, don't be deceived by outward expressions or the things that you might hear. You have to, the spiritual path is a path of striving. It's not a path, in fact, what's the hadith? لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. That none of you truly believes until the hawa, essentially the things that you intend or do, your inclinations, until they are exactly aligned with what I have been sent with, which is the Sharia. And so that's why the ulama and our tradition is so heavy on this, which is that the jihad that we speak about, al-jihad al-akbar, the greater jihad, is your nafs. Right? Because jihad, their minds tend to go towards military warfare. But military warfare warring against your lower self. And the reason why they say that warring against your lower self is the greater form of jihad, right, is because in military warfare we can determine tactics that are used by the opposition. Right? In military warfare we can try to understand what the opposition is trying to do, what their plan of attack may be. And importantly, this type of opponent in military warfare is visible. We can see them. We can understand their movements. Right? The nafs is not like that. The nafs is hidden. Right? It's not a visible opponent. Its machinations are not easy to understand. Right? Its tactics are sometimes, they get the better of us. So really, if you're thinking about an opponent, they don't come much greater than our own nafs. Right? I know you can throw in shaitan and others, but the nafs is one of the great opponents, if you like, and it must be, and they speak about it in this way, as the Imām is saying. Look at the strong language he's using, that you qatal hawaha bi sayf al-riyada. Qatal literally means to kill. So he's saying you have to kill your desires bi sayf, with the sword of spiritual struggle. So in other words, even his language that he's using to describe your relationship or your journey to subdue your nafs, the language is military, right? To show us the type of effort that's required to vanquish this thing. And so where we see that the Prophet ﷺ tells us that لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به, that none of you truly believes until the things that you intend or your inclinations are completely in accordance with what I've brought, that it can't be then the case that some of our intentions are in accordance with the Sharia and other intentions are in accordance with our desires. Right? That as I said, in our day-to-day lives, our hawa, in other words, our intentions, our inclinations are in accordance with dunya. And in the salah and ibadah, we kind of like try to flip around and say, yeah, now I can, because this is the ibadah, I must have some humility, I'm standing in front of Allah. We forget that this life it's really two major relationships that we have. One with Allah and one with people. Us and Allah and us and people. And the thing is that they are beautifully combined. You can't separate them. If you read the emphasis that is placed on the rights that people have over us, it's incredible. The depth of how we're taught to behave around and treat other people with kindness. And look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ. How many examples do we have where people are wronging him, they're being unjust toward him and his companions, and what do we always see? Idfa' billati hiya ahsan, that Allah's Messenger ﷺ always responds with that which is better. You'll never see there's a reciprocation of someone did this, and I mentioned it before. Growing up, I read this one story in the life of the Prophet ﷺ where when he used to walk the streets of Mecca and a lady used to throw rubbish in the path that he would walk in. And then one day she wasn't there, and so the Prophet ﷺ inquired about her, and he found out that she was not well, and he went to see her and went to see after her and see how she is. And as a child, as an adult of course, but as a child you think that's really counterintuitive to the things that especially as a child, you're always, it's my ball, it's my seat, they're my friends, right? Because it's all about you, isn't it, as a child? And here we're being told in the life of the best of examples that in fact it's not about you, it's about others. And this is an example and of many examples in the life of the Prophet ﷺ where we can see the correct manner of behavior and comporting. Now, and so this idea that the Imam spells out here in the in this first paragraph, where he's speaking about mujahada, struggling, striving against the self, and this really speaks to to a really important idea in our deen, which is this idea of takhliya. And takhliya is this notion of emptying yourself out. And so the saying in Arabic is takhliya qabla tahliya. Tahliya in Arabic is essentially the fine things that you wear, jewelry, hula it's called in Arabic. So your jewelry is called hula because it's the finery. But before you adorn yourself with your finery, you have to make sure that if you've worked the whole day, you're not going to come back and without having a shower and getting dressed properly, put your finery on, right? It doesn't make sense. So there has to be something in preparation for that. So this is in Arabic what's called takhliya qabla al-tahliya. Now, this word in Arabic, takhliya, it comes from the word khala yakhlu. Khala yakhlu, which we can kind of translate as maybe right now solitude, but in its basic sense it means to be devoid of something or to be empty of something. Khala, to be devoid or to be empty of something. And the idea is that from khala comes the word khalwa, and khalwa is to be in solitude, to be by yourself. And the idea of khalwa is to distance ourselves from others and to distance ourselves from the world and its distractions. Right? But what's the purpose? Why would we do this? It's so that we can empty ourselves. That's the idea. That's why it's called khalwa. It's not just that you're in solitude, but it's literally an emptying that's taking place. And so in khalwa, the idea is that we're supposed to come to recognize the insignificance of the dunya. What are we competing over this nonsense? What's the value of it? What's it even worth for us to even engage in any sort of competition with other people? Makes no sense. It has no value in itself for us to give it any further value. And so when we see people isolate themselves today, I'm not saying in khalwa, for example, they could be living by themselves or they're traveling in a hotel room by themselves. The problem that we see that people face is that loneliness or any state of isolation, people don't know who they're supposed to turn to. So what do? They turn towards themselves. And when they turn inwards and towards themselves, what do they see? They see all I am is the dunya. All that I'm made up of, when I look inside me, I'm just seeing the dunya, right? And so being cut off from the dunya is like being cut off from themselves. That's the irony of today's attempts at, or not attempts, but when people find themselves in loneliness. Why? Because the people of the spiritual path, they embrace loneliness because the idea is that when they look inside, they find something which is of true value, which is a dhikr of Allah. But in today's day and age, when we look inside, we find the dunya. And the scary thing is that you're not able to cut yourself off from that, because by cutting yourself off from the dunya, you're cutting yourself off from yourself. Then what happens? Struggle. So not only can we not turn to, in these cases, people don't turn to Allah, they can't even turn to themselves. So what happens is that people begin to occupy themselves with everything that will be a distraction. Planning the next holiday, the next dinner, the next weekend away, the next purchase that's going to be made. I've just bought the new car, but the lease will finish in 3 years, and then I'm going to go and get that one. And then, once the kids are grown up, we can then move out from this house and we can get that. Everything is planned to the T. It's so perfectly organized that, the next 50 years of our lives. Right? Why? Because we want to distract ourselves, because when we sit, just take a seat back and just reflect, it becomes scary. Because human beings have an existential fear of death. When we really sit down and think, we're going to die. and then value starts coming in its proper place then. Right? We can get really overwhelmed by this and overcome by this and become scared by it. But the people of Allah, they recognize that, you know what, we've just been put in this place and we're meant to work in a certain way to get somewhere. So I'm actually really looking forward to my death. So when you look at the lives of the companions and when they speak about what's the greatest day that we can imagine in our lives, and they say the day that we meet Allah. In other words, the day that we die. And it's a hadith that why is it that the ummah will find themselves in a state of outward weakness towards the end of time? Because we're told that the hubbud dunya will have become embedded in the people's hearts. And what else? Karahiyatul maut. And people will begin to detest dying. In other words, a mu'min is someone who embraces that if we've done all that, and look, we've always said this, it's not about perfection, it's about striving. And as long as we strive with all of our faults, and we never give it up, and we said this last time, that if we believe that we have faults, which we all do, we cannot give up striving because of our faults. We have to keep on striving, and if we're going to fall, we just have to keep getting back up. Just be sincere. As I've said, it sounds like an odd thing to say, but you know, if you fall, if you sin, just be sincere in your desire not to have wanted to do that. As opposed to that you're taking some glory in it. Right? That's why, you know, look, we're going to fall, but you know, look, sometimes, let's say, you know, if you're speaking ill of someone, God forbid, there's a ladha, a taste, if you like. It's something which is appealing to us, that we want to do it more, and you know, you can go on. It's amazing that you know, it's amazing how many ways you can character assassinate the same person. Why? Because we love doing it. But the idea here is that, let's just say something has overcome us and we've had to speak about someone, and it's still wrong, but are we feeling in our hearts that, look, I know I shouldn't really be doing this, but I'm just so upset by someone, you know, that I've gotten to that point that I'm having to say this, and you know what, actually forget it, I don't mean what I said. I mean, are we getting to those, at least striving to get there, and then build from that, right? So in other words, where we do find ourselves sinning, let's be sincere in our desire to not to want to have committed that sin, but recognizing that sometimes weaknesses, you know, in us as human beings, sometimes may take over. And so, coming back to this word khala and khalwa, that in Arabic then you say khala about a vessel. You know, here, look, you have this bottle here. This is a vessel. And you'll say khala mimma fihi. So right now we have water, and if it was emptied out of water, you'd say khala mimma fihi. It became empty or devoid of what was in it. Right? It's the same word that's used to describe you freeing yourself from your faults. Khala min al-aib is that, in other words, pretend this is your body, and what's inside you are faults, and the thing you're getting rid of is your faults. Same word that's used. But what's interesting is this relationship then between emptying yourself and solitude. That one of the ways to empty yourself is to have your time where it's just you and Allah. And you're truly reflecting on your character. And the greatest way to start your character building exercise for all of us is to actually try to find out fault lines in the exact places that we think we're great. Because we'll often think that, yeah, you know, alhamdulillah, I visit my parents, you know, every day, I call them, so I'm okay on that front. Are we? The reason why I say that is because it's a good test for us that at least the evidently wrong things then are a little bit easier to decipher, right? And so, what we then see is it's a beautiful idea, this, that if this bottle wasn't empty, could I put anything in here? I couldn't, could I? It's full. Right now this bottle is full. So I can't actually put any more water in it. So if I were to, it will overflow. Let's say that this bottle is us, and the things inside this bottle are the dunya. Where is the deen going to go? there's nowhere to fit it. So this expression that to adorn yourself with something, you need to engage in an emptying out of something to start with, is that idea. You need to start finding solitude to empty the dunya out of ourselves. And what's really incredible is that, while we're getting rid of all this rubbish, really getting deep inside ourselves and trying to rid ourselves, because it has to be that way. You have to look at yourself and say, look, to our nafs, look, I've got your number, I know what you're all about, and you're digging deep in there, you're going to the depths of where you are, seeing all the demons, and you're just getting rid of all of them, trying your best. Once you're on that path of khala, that's the striving that we're here for. Because what's the opposite of khala in Arabic? Sounds very similar to it. Khala, mala, right? Mala'a. Mala'a means to, imla, for those of you who do Arabic, to dictate something and to write it. So mala'a in Arabic means to fill something. So if this was empty, I'd say, oh, can you fill it? And the verb is mala'a, imla'hu. What's the greatest, in the next world, the highest assembly called in Arabic? Al-Mala'ul A'la. It's amazing, isn't it? That the highest assembly in paradise, it's called Al-Mala'u Al-A'la, the place that you are filled in now. And the idea is that to get the filling in, you have to have reached that point empty. Empty of what? Of the dunya. So the more that we empty ourselves of the dunya, the more we... And what's interesting is, in terms of the dunya, that... Muhammad. Take food. The ulama say that to deprive yourself of food is worship. Right? Why? Because it's dunya, isn't it? And what's the hadith? That the best form of eating is that which keeps your back straight. And if you must, a third. And look, we're all in part of this, overeating industry. But it's part of this. It's we have to recognize where dunya, what also is part of the dunya, and food is part of the dunya. Now look, of course, we can have the delights of the dunya in certain, in the context of brotherhood and in inviting someone to your house, etc. Right? That's all fine. But outside of that, it should be something that the more empty I am, not just of the concepts of the dunya, but even the physical aspects of the dunya in terms of its food, the better it is for us. Because we can recognize immediately that if we don't eat, our bodies become a lot healthier. Right? And when I say don't eat, I don't mean starve yourself. I mean, that you bring it under control, that you eat what we're meant to eat and when we're meant to eat it. You see the effect of it. Likewise is the effect of ridding ourselves of the dunya. You'll see a spiritual effect immediately. And this idea of proximity. So then the Imam says, just second paragraph, وَعْلَمْ أو وَلْيُعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللِّسَانَ الْمُطْلَقِ وَالْقَلْبَ الْمُطْبَقِ الْمَمْلُوء بِالْغَفْلَةِ وَالشَّهْوَةِ عَلَامَةُ الشَّقَاوَةِ. Look, know that the unrestrained tongue, in other words, a tongue that you don't even think about what you're saying. You just, run your mouth, as they say. And the heart that is rusted over and full of negligence and greed, that they are a sign of misfortune. So what's really interesting is that the Imam uses the word mamlu'a. Mamlu'a is mala'a. So he's saying if you're full of rust, in other words, what's accumulated there from the dunya, then unfortunately that's a sign of misfortune. Misfortune in a theological sense. That shaqawa is someone who's, heading in a direction that they shouldn't be heading in. فإذا لم تقتل النفس بصدق المجاهدة فلن يحيا قلبك بأنوار المعرفة. I think there's another reading as well. فلن تحيا. I think there's another reading. فلن تحيا قلبك بأنوار المعرفة. And so if you do not kill the ego with sincere effort, your heart will not be animated by the lights of gnosis. Now, where the Imam says that the lisan al-mutlaq, because we know that the tongue is gets us into trouble. And if someone is just saying anything they want to say without restraint, it actually speaks to the actual word in Arabic, because in Arabic, what's the word for speech? Kalam. And the word kalam in Arabic comes from the three root letters kalima, right? The kaf, the lam, and the mim. And what kalima actually in Arabic means is to injure someone. Isn't that amazing? That the one of the foundational meanings of the word for speech in Arabic is to injure someone. What does that mean? You know, in other words, if we're not bringing into unity the tongue and the intellect, in other words, you're thinking what you're saying, then this thing here will run loose. And if it runs loose, then you're going to revert to default, which is to hurt people. It's amazing, isn't it? How many times do we open our mouth and say things that are hurtful to people because we just didn't spend time to think about what are we going to say? And so this relationship between the word for speech, kalam, and to injure someone, and if you change the letters around, you'll get mulakama, right? Mulakama, same three letters. Mulaka means to box someone, to punch someone. Same three root letters. But it can also mean malaka. What does malaka mean? It means to possess somebody. So you can malaktuhu, I took possession of it. Because if you are someone who is beloved to others because you're good in the things that you say to others, you're soft, your speech is soft, it's kind, it's gentle, it's polite, it's loving, it's caring, it's concerning, right? It's when people see you, they say, yeah, I want to hear what he has to say, right? Because always only good things come from this person. Then you've used your kalam to gain mulk. Right? Same three root letters, malak, kalima, changing it to malaka. That you can actually then have this as if people are, given to you because of the beautiful nature of your speech. That's what I say. There's a undeniable relationship between the language, i.e. Arabic, and reality as we see it. Right? And so we'll finish on this last paragraph here, where the Imam tells gives a beautiful example. He says, وَلْيُعْلَمْ أَنَّ بَعْضَ مَسَائِلِكَ الَّتِي سَأَلْتَنِي عَنْهَا لَا يَسْتَقِيمُ جَوَابُهَا بِالْكِتَابَةِ وَالْقَوْلِ. That the answers to some of the things about which you have asked me are not brought about through writing and discussion. So you've asked me some things, but I can't give you the reply by sending you a letter with the response to those questions. Why? وَإِن تَبْلُغْ تِلْكَ الْحَالَ تَعْرِفْ مَا هِيَ. If you attain to the states that you're asking about, you will know what they are. And if not, knowing them is an impossibility. Right? وَإِلَّا فَعِلْمُهَا مِنَ الْمُسْتَحِيلَاتِ لِأَنَّهَا ذَوْقِيَّةٌ. In other words, there are some things that you're asking me about, and I can't give you a written reply to that. Why? Because they are things that you must experience. As the Imam says, وَكُلُّ مَا يَكُونُ ذَوْقِيًا لَا يَسْتَقِيمُ وَصْفُهُ بِالْقَوْلِ. That the description of anything to do with direct experience is not furnished through discussion. In other words, you can't tell someone something which can only be known through experience. You can't describe it to them. The example the Imam gives, كَحَلَاوَةِ الْحُلْوِ وَمَرَارَةِ الْمُرِّ لَا تُعْرَفْ إِلَّا بِالذَّوْقِ. That's the sweetness of something sweet and the bitterness of what is bitter is not known except by experience. Someone's never tasted something sweet. How can you explain it to them? Someone's never had honey. How can you explain it to them? If someone's never tasted something bitter, how can you explain it to them? And this is what I say. We've mentioned many, many times. It's a recurring theme in every time we meet almost. If we want to know how to rectify our situations, how to journey to Allah, how to improve our character, refine who we are, it must come through knowledge. And that knowledge is acquired by sitting with people who have an understanding of those states. Otherwise, it's very similar to what the Imam's saying here. You're claiming that you want to get to Allah, but what are you doing about it? It's like you're saying, I know what sweet is, I've never tasted it. You don't know what it is. It's the same thing as saying, I know what I need to get to Allah, but you've never done anything because the frames aren't there. So the only way that we can get to where we need to get to is by making sure that we're engulfing ourselves with the right people, with the people of Allah, the people of this path. And in the absence of that, if you can't find a single individual, then what you have to do is you have to, and alhamdulillah ta'ala that we can do this in this country, is that we can make our hearts attached to the masajid. You can go to the masjid every single day, for every prayer that you can make it, and that act of attaching yourself to the masajid is going to be something which makes our hearts full of understanding. Allah will give us knowledge then. And then He will, because what's the dua? Allahumma dullani ala man yadulluni alayk. Oh Allah, guide me to the one that will guide me to you. Right? Do we think Allah, if we really turn to Allah, we get this question sometimes, which is, how am I meant to find a spiritual guide? Spiritual guide is not hiding from you. We're hiding from it. Do we really think that if we raised our hands and said to Allah, guide me to the one that's going to guide me to you, we're going to be disappointed? Never. We will always find those people. Even though it could turn out to be someone that you knew. Right? So, then the Imam says, كَمَا حُكِيَ أَنَّ عِنِّينًا كَتَبَ إِلَى صَاحِبٍ لَهُ أَنْ عَرِّفْنِي لَذَّةَ الْمُجَامَعَ كَيْفَ تَكُونَ فَكَتَبَ لَهُ فِي جَوَابِهِ. So, thus it was related that an impotent man wrote to a friend of his to tell him about the pleasure of intimate relations with his spouse. فَكَتَبَ لَهُ فِي جَوَابِهِ يَا فُلَانِ إِنِّي كُنْتُ حَسِبْتُكَ عِنِّينًا فَقَطْ. So he's asking him, can you describe to me the intimacy that you have with your spouse? And he said, what's the response that his friend gives him? He says, oh so-and-so, I thought that you were just impotent. Now I know that you are both impotent and stupid. Right? وَالْآنَ عَرَفْتُ أَنَّكَ عِنِّينَ وَأَحْمَقْ. Why? لِأَنَّ هَذِي لَذَّ ذَوْقِيَّةٌ. Because this pleasure is only known through direct experience. إِن تَصِلْ إِلَيْهَا تَعْرِفْ. If you experience it, you will know it. وَإِلَّا لَا يَسْتَقِيمُ وَصْفُهَا بِالْقَوْلِ وَالْكِتَابَةِ. And if you don't experience it, then it can't be explained neither through writing or through talking. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We'll stop here for this week, inshallah, and if there are any questions, we'll take them now.